In today's video, we are discussing key takeaways from both the Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns press conference, plus getting into what was a busy night in MLB free agency around the league and what it could mean for the New York Mets. Let's get into it. All right, Mets fans, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the True Mets Talk podcast. It's your boy CP, and we are talking about some internal and external notes regarding this Mets offseason as we are closer and closer to the start of spring training games here in just about a little bit over a week and a half. Before we get fully into this video, talking about some comments from Mendoza and Stearns, as well as some free agent signings that we saw last night around the league and how it could impact the New York Mets indirectly, or I should say directly at this point, please do smash those thumbs up buttons on this video. If you enjoy these conversations and discussions and the polls and the live streams and all the content that I do on this channel, please smash on that subscribe and comment your thoughts and opinions down below in the comment section. Let's have a discussion, starting off with the Mendoza and Stearns press conferences that took place in back-to-back days. We kind of are rehashing here some of the thoughts that we had in our last Mets Hot Stove live stream that took place on the channel last night. If you missed that between myself and Rob, that's going to be in the description down below. Check that out after you check out this video. But first and foremost, David Stearns preaching roster flexibility and essentially closing the book on Mr. OMG and Jose Iglesias' time with the New York Mets. Last week, we got a report from Pat Ragazzo that the Mets had a one-year offer out to Jose Iglesias and nothing really came of it. And at this point, we can safely assume with what David Stearns had to say, he didn't say it directly, but essentially he was saying that he was going to give the opportunity. And Mendoza also reiterating this notion that Luis Angel Acuña, of all people, especially with the younger guys, are going to get this major opportunity to make an everyday contribution in 2025. Now, it's very interesting now that we're not bringing back Jose Iglesias and he's essentially out of the picture, according to these recent comments. What are the Mets going to do in spring training? Are they actually going to give Luis Angel Acuña a shot in spring training to outcompete and outduel Jeff McNeil to be the starting second baseman come opening day? Or are the Mets just saying that at this point and are going to be rolling with Jeff McNeil to see how he does in the first couple months of the season? Can they get a new Jeff McNeil, new life out of Jeff McNeil, maybe more so towards his 2022 production before they fully rely on Luis Angel Acuña moving forward? That's the biggest thing for me that I'm going to be watching out for, the head-to-head matchup between the performances of Luis Angel Acuña and Jeff McNeil. If you ask me if Luis Angel Acuña outperforms Jeff McNeil, I'm giving him that starting job out of spring training come opening day. But I'm not quite sure and I'm not quite convinced the Mets are going to do the same. It's a very hard argument to make for them, just PR-wise, to give that roster spot to a young and up-and-coming player over a veteran that has 2 years left on his deal. Now, listen, I'm going to be completely straight up with you all. Again, like I just said, I do not want you all to get the wrong impression here. If Luis Angel Acuña wins the job, he wins the job and he deserves that. I'm rooting for this guy, and I think that he's going to make meaningful contributions every day to the New York Mets here soon. I just think that Jeff McNeil is going to get this last chance, whether he deserves it or not, to prove that he belongs with the New York Mets on an everyday basis and to play out the rest of his contract the next 2 years in the Mets uniform rather than parting ways with him via the trade deadline or maybe in the next offseason if they can't find a trade partner at the trade deadline for Jeff McNeil. Okay, so that's the second base competition. So all eyes are on second base. You even have Jet Williams, who I'll talk about here in just a second on this video as it pertains to the next slide and what's happening around the league. But Carlos Mendoza also stating that Ronnie Mauricio will not be in game action until at least mid-March. We can all but assume that he's going to start his season off in AAA. He's actually looked good with some of the swings that we've been seeing out of spring training early on. I think he rocketed a baseball off of Clay Holmes when they were doing some live BP on the field, which is good to see. Clearly, Ronnie Mauricio has always been the more versatile hitter from the left side, but he does have that switch hitting capability. Should anything happen at the DH spot, maybe to Jesse Winker via injury or via lack of production, same thing with Starling Marte. Maybe we can see Ronnie Mauricio up within the first few months, maybe midway through the season. But I think it's very clear at this point the Mets are rolling with a platoon DH, and Ronnie Mauricio still going to need to rehab that knee a little bit more, get up to game speed, and so therefore he's going to be starting off his season in AAA without him seeing game action until mid-March. That timeline just simply won't add up. Clearly, with opening day being March 27th. So that's the update on Ronnie Mauricio. David Stearns feels comfortable with the current pitching depth. This was his direct quote when asked about the starting pitching rotation and when he compared it to the rotation going into last season with the likes of Quintana, Severino, Manaea, Adrian Hauser at that point. He feels more comfortable with the starting pitching outlook this season with the new additions. Clearly, re-signing Sean Manaea, having a healthy Kodai Senga, which he did not have at his disposal back in the start of 2024 in that campaign, but also bringing in the likes of a guy like Griffin Canning, Frankie Montas, Clay Holmes. I know that this is going to be a very controversial topic, and we've been talking about this starting pitching rotation, and we'll talk about it here in probably just a couple minutes when we get to the next slide as it pertains to the Padres and what they did last night. But this was actually pretty key for me to hear from David Stearns because, the Mets have shown an unwillingness to go out and sign long-term deals to pitchers that are maybe age 29, 30, 31 on the market. And they have clearly shown the unwillingness to part ways with some of their top prospects for a guy like Garrett Crochet. And at this point, a guy like Dylan Cease, that definitely could change and the outlook could change. But David Stearns basically standing on 10 toes and telling Mets fans that he feels comfortable with the starting rotation as is, maybe reevaluating at the MLB trade deadline. Whether you agree with him or not, I think that I've gotten that impression for quite some time from David Stearns, and I've been talking about this team and this starting rotation in that light over the past few weeks because that's essentially what David Stearns believes in. And he told the media and the baseball world that yesterday. And the last thing here, this is really a non-factor at this point with Pete Alonso and the deal officially going through yesterday, passing the physical. He is on a 2-year deal, $20 million in the first year, $24 million. There's a signing bonus in the first year. So at that point, he's making $30 million. But that $10 million signing bonus doesn't count against the luxury tax hit. So that's how they kind of allocate the signing bonuses. So really the breakdown is AAV wise, 20 million for the first year, 24 million for the second year. But that first year he's making 30 really with the $10 million signing bonus. So John Heyman broke that down. If you missed that, go on his X account and you can see the contract breakdown. But David Stearns did not know that Alonso was going to come back when they signed AJ Minter and Jesse Winker. John Heyman and Andy Martino at that point were adamant that Alonso was going elsewhere and that these signings were pivot options for the New York Mets. Probably understanding that Alonso, there's a good chance that he wasn't going to come back. A lot of Mets fans, including myself, did not believe that. We always thought that the Mets front office was we're going to make those moves regardless of whether Alonso was going to come back or not. And David Stearns reaffirmed that at that point, when those signings happened, it kind of was a pivot point for the New York Mets until things ended up working out with Pete Alonso and Scott Boras to bring him back to Queens. So I thought that was an interesting note. I know Andy Martino catches a lot of flack on Mets Twitter, on Mets X, Mets Instagram, wherever Andy Martino posts his content with good reason because some of the opinions that he gives on the Mets is just absolutely garbage. But when he sticks to the facts and he reports on a factual basis, I think Andy Martino, for better for worse in terms of admitting this, definitely is a trustworthy source, or else he really wouldn't be employed at SNY at the end of the day. Let's talk about some notes, MLB notes from around the league. Angels signed Kenley Jansen. to a 1-year, $10 million deal. This has really nothing to do with the Mets other than the fact that they were actually interested in bringing Kenley Jansen on board before they went down the route of Ryan Stanek as a setup man for Edwin Diaz. So Kenley Jansen, I think he's approaching some sort of saves record. He's had a fantastic career. He had a good season last season in Boston. He is going to get the chance to accumulate a lot of saves and an Angels team that's making some moves, right? I mean, they're the Angels at the end of the day, and I understand that, but they are making moves in this offseason, which is good to see. And Kenley Jansen finds his new home on a 1-year, $10 million deal. The bombshell that was dropped on everybody on the timeline yesterday, Alex Bregman, having offers from multiple teams. The Cubs were interested, the Tigers, the Blue Jays, the Red Sox were interested. The Houston Astros were even interested in bringing him back after parting ways with Ryan Presley to make some cap space, roster space for Alex Bregman in terms of their luxury tax payroll. He goes to Boston and signs with the Red Sox for $40 million per season. I think that there's a couple of opt-outs there, but in total, it's a 3-year, $120 million deal. Again, $40 million per season is absolutely insane. And I know that he has the better accolades and has the better defense over a guy like Pete Alonso. They both share the same agent in Scott Boras. I know that Pete Alonso, watching that deal go down and that news hitting the timeline, I know Pete Alonso is sick with how, the negotiations played out between him and the Mets and what he actually settled for. Alex Bregman, who really had a down season compared to his standards, just like Pete Alonso did in the regular season, makes out with $40 million per season. Listen, Pete, I'm sorry. I'm glad you're back in Queens, but I think it's time that you had a serious conversation with Scott Boras if you're going to continue that relationship with him as your agent. Okay, now to the juicy part of this podcast episode and what every Mets fan is probably wondering with what transpired with the Padres yesterday in signing Nick Pivetta, who the Mets also had some interest in this offseason, to a 4-year deal with multiple opt-outs in between. This deal is heavily backloaded and does I think contains some opt-outs, I think starting in the 2026 season, if I'm not mistaken. He's only getting $4 million for the 2025 season. I think that goes up to 14 or 15 for 2026. It's a $1 million AAV with a $3 million signing bonus. So again, the Padres are heavily backloading that contract, but they do bring in a pretty respectable starting pitcher. You can pencil him in as an SP3 or an SP4 on any given team. Again, we had discussions about the Mets potentially going after a guy like Nick Pivetta, but everyone wants to know now, whether you're a Cubs fan at this point, whether you're a Mets fan who need, right? Both of these teams need a frontline starter. Ideally. I know Stern says that he's comfortable with this rotation, but if you are able to get a frontline starter in the doors before the 2025 season, you're going to make that move all day long for the right price, I would have to imagine, if you're David Stearns. Does this move, the Padres signing Nick Pivetta, make them more likely to deal Dylan Cease before the season starts? Listen, I've been very adamant that they have the ability to wait and see what happens in the first half and then roll with Dylan Cease for the first half and trade him at the trade deadline. But at that point, the con to that is that you get less of a return at the deadline for half a season of Dylan Cease than you would trading him away. So a trade partner team gets a full season's worth of Dylan Cease, right? You're going to shortchange yourself and short yourself on any prospect return, MLB ready talent return that you would get for a frontline starter and ace in Dylan Cease. Now, Nick Pivetta is good. He's an SP3, SP4, like I said, but he's not a frontline starter. So clearly the rotation in San Diego would take a massive hit if they're rolling with just Michael King and Yu Darvish at the top of their rotation. Now, we got to remember that Joe Musgrove is on the shelf. He had Tommy John surgery late in 2024, so he is done for the entirety of the 2025 season. Are they really going to take that chance right? When they're still trying to compete, presumably out in the NL West and the NL in general, by trading away Dylan Cease when they can have more so a two-headed monster at the front of their rotation with Cease and King. I don't know what's going to happen here, but it's very clear that AJ Preller has set a standard of what they expect in return for Dylan Cease to the Mets, to the Cubs, asking for number one prospects, number two prospects in return. They've been asking for Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat, and they've been asking for the number one overall prospect in the Cubs farm system, to which the Cubs were like, no. I mean, at this point, no. The answer is no. This is where I'm thinking the Mets, if they are serious about Dylan Cease, can go down, right? They have the ability to package Dylan Cease and Robert Suarez, although I do think that that would be a larger lift for the New York Mets in terms of prospect return to get an all-star that had 36 saves under his belt last season, 33-year-old Robert Suarez and Dylan Cease, an ace into these doors. You're going to have to pay a premium price. Plus, Edwin Diaz is most likely going to opt back into his contract, making $15 million next season, and then escalating that to $17 million in 2027 before he hits the open market again. So I'm not quite sure if it's feasible for the Mets to bring in a guy like Robert Suarez, although crazier things have happened. If they were serious about Kenley Jansen, Robert Suarez is only an $8 million salary cap hit for 2025. That's what he'll be making before he inevitably opts out of that deal. But I do think that if you want to headline this trade with Jet Williams, and if the Padres are willing, Robert Suarez aside, let's just say that this is a one-for-one deal or a one-for-multiple deal between the Padres giving up Dylan Cease in exchange for Jet Williams and maybe, let's say, I don't know, another top 10 prospect, Jonah Tong or Blake Tidwell. As much as I would like to keep Jonah Tong, I think he's going to be fantastic. I've seen him throwing out in spring training. He looks electric. That delivery kind of looks like Tim Lincecum. I think he's going to be special. But if the Padres are serious now with Nick Pivetta in the doors about essentially trading Dylan Cease, and if Jet Williams can be the headliner, their outfield is looking brutal. And with the Mets stating that Jet Williams has been playing and is getting center field consistent reps out there in center field, that could be the perfect persuasion that the Padres need to make that deal happen, and getting a top 60 MLB pipeline prospect in return, in addition to whoever else they want to add on, whether it's a guy like Tyler McGill, if they need an MLB ready pitcher, etc. If that's the route that the Padres are willing to go down and the Mets are also willing to meet at that price for Jet Williams, I do that all day long. I still think the Padres would be asking for Luis Angel Acuña as well, if not in replacement of Jet Williams. But I think that the way that the Mets budge here is by adding Jet Williams into this deal and making him the headliner. So Mets fans, let me know what you think about all of this. What David Stearns had to say, Carlos Mendoza's comments, anything that we've seen around the league. Let's have a discussion. Hopefully you enjoyed these notes in this podcast episode. Hit on that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to go ahead and comment your thoughts and opinions down below. It's the True Mets Talk podcast. Until next video, I'm out. Peace.